Hello everyone! Welcome to my music tutorials for people who want to compose music, but also people who simply want to enjoy music and understand it better. How do you compose a symphonic trio? It's a part of a movement, it's a little piece of music, a unit unto itself. Sometimes it's part of a minuet and trio, sometimes part of a scherzo and trio. And the trio has a character. It's always a little bit lighter, a little gentler, a little more innocent than whatever comes before and after it. And it's a lovely kind of piece to write, and I hope a good lesson for anyone to try. It evolved first as a literal trio, two upper instruments playing in harmony and a bass line down below. As symphonies grew more complicated, trios became more elaborate, more instruments were layered in, and there's always something odd about calling it a trio when 50 instruments are playing. But you can often still see the trio bones of the thing. Later in the Romantic period, these distinctions became less obvious as the traditions began to break down. But right now, I'm concentrating on the early Romantic period. In a previous video, I wrote a sketch, or a minimalist thread of music, for a scherzo-and-trio movement, and the sketch was supposed to channel some of the spirit of Schubert, who was an early Romantic, one might say the quintessential early Romantic composer. Today, I want to take the sketch of the trio and turn it into a full orchestration. The trio comes in two parts, and we'll tackle the first part today. Let's get right into it. Let's listen to the first 8 measures. It sounds so innocent and light. How should we orchestrate it? The first step is easy. Let's separate the sketch into the first and second violins. The next step is a little more work. It's a trio, and we only have 2 voices. We need a third. We need a bass line. Here I try to invent something fun and lively to give it a little rhythmic interest. Usually you think of counterpoint in terms of melody and countermelody, but you can also have a kind of a rhythmic counterpoint. I made the bass line rhythmically a little off-kilter and off-beat. Ooh, I have an idea. Let's throw in a little viola flourish. Sure, the music is mostly a trio, but the viola pops in and says, "Don't forget about me." Here's how the strings sound. You know me, after the strings I like to put in the woodwinds, then the horns, then the heavy brass, then the tympani. But how's this for an idea? Let's add absolutely nothing. It's perfect as it is. Because I always show you the orchestration piecemeal, it's easy to miss some of the musical flow. The reason why this very simple opening works aesthetically is because it contrasts with the complicated full orchestra music of the scherzo that comes right before it. You step from a busy, dramatic, crowded ensemble into a radically stripped-down trio section. Not every trio section is so reduced. Certainly not every example is a literal trio, but in spirit they go for the same kind of effect. The opening of a trio section always seems to introduce itself as a gentle rest for the ears. And we're not stuck with this reduced orchestration. As we move along, we can add more instruments and more orchestral colors, and that's what we'll do. Let's scroll ahead and look at the second segment. Here's what the sketch sounds like. Again, I'll separate the sketch into the first and second violins, and I'll add a cello bass line. This time, let's add more instruments. I like the idea of gradually scaling up the orchestral involvement. We started with just the strings for 8 measures. Now we'll add the woodwinds. The oboes can double the first and second violins, and the bassoons can double the cellos. This is really the simplest possible orchestration. Pick a voice in the strings and double it with another instrument to give it color. If you orchestrate like this through an entire movement, it would be dreadfully boring and a waste of an orchestra, so why do it here? because orchestration is always about contrast. There's nothing wrong with this kind of simple-minded doubling, for a moment, to contrast with the surrounding music. From pure strings in the last segment, we now have strings with a woodwind bite in this segment. Listen to how the oboes, which have a delicate but also a penetrating sound, change the tone quality of the string melody. And listen to how the bassoon adds a kind of gritty intensity to the string bass line. Oboes and bassoons have a special affinity for each other. Now let's scroll forward and listen to the sketch of the next segment. I think this segment will have to be scaled up again, just a little bit. I like the idea of the forward march, almost like a plot, a storyline, the music getting incrementally more colorful, more rich. Or maybe it's like walking up steps, and this segment is the third step. What shall we do to make the third segment a little more intense than the previous one? To start with, let's separate the sketch into the first and second violins and add a bass line. Last time, the violins were doubled by the oboes. This time, let's double them with the clarinets. A clarinet is less delicate, it has a more powerful resonance. Just the change in tone color from oboe to clarinet will draw the ear's attention. For the bass line, we'll double it with the bassoon again. We don't really have any other woodwind option down there. But this time we can beef it up by adding the string basses. Now the bass line has more depth and body to it. This is absolutely standard technique. Now I want to add something else in here, some filler notes in the violas for harmonic background. This is very idiomatic, very typical, using the violas to play these quiet doodly notes, to add more body to the harmonies. You won't even hear it, not consciously, but at an unconscious level, you'll get an impression of more sonic richness. The music is swelling. Just to make sure the balance is right, let's mark everything an increment up in volume. We'll mark it as mezzo piano. It tells everyone to be a tiny little bit louder, except for the violas. They'll stay at P so they can blend into the background. The passage sounds like this. And now we have the final segment that we'll orchestrate today. First, let's listen to the Bears sketch. How shall we continue our gradual scaling up of complexity? Well, here is my solution. The strings now have full, rich harmonies. The bass line is still a combination of cello, double bass, and bassoon. The top melody is now doubled by the flute an octave higher, both flutes together, to make sure it really stands out. It's not an accident that, as the trio progresses, we've added first an oboe, the most delicate of the woodwinds, then switched to the clarinet, a much more robust instrument, and then to the flute, which, in its higher register, cuts through and glitters like diamonds. Here we have a crescendo, leading up to a strong end to this first part of the trio. It's the first big cadence of the trio. Everything has been building to this point. The gradual scaling up of the orchestration leads to here, and I've added the horns to help build up that crescendo. Horns are exceptionally good in a crescendo because they can play very quietly, blending into the background, but they can also grow like crazy and add tremendous power to the sound. There's still no heavy brass, no trumpets or trombones, and no tympani for that matter, because the trio section is still a light section of music. I don't want to overpower it, not yet anyway. But the real change is here. These rhythms beating in the background come straight out of the first part of the movement, the scherzo part. We covered that in previous videos. So while the trio begins disarmingly simple, some of the complexity and intensity of the prior music comes creeping back into it again. It helps to give the piece more unity. Here's what it sounds like. And now we're ready to rewind back to the start of the trio and listen to the whole thing so far. It's simple, it has a kind of innocence to it, and it has a very delicate orchestration. And keep in mind the trajectory. It starts small and gradually gains a little more color and complexity, step by step, instrument by instrument. It's only 30 seconds of music that we've orchestrated today, but I hope it's given you a sense of the typical trios from the time, the early Romantic period. The spirit of it, the harmonic language, the musical flourishes, the orchestration, it could all have been written in 1820. I'm nowhere near the originality or skill level of Schubert, but I think this trio has come out as a pretty clean and spot-on example of this type of music, and therefore hopefully a good lesson in the basic techniques. See what you think. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed learning about music here, and make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. I'll talk to you next time.